The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sergeant Mike Rodriguez walked toward the main building. He had been stationed at Fort Braxton for 3 years now, and he thought he knew everyone who mattered. The 28-year-old sergeant carried himself with the confidence of someone who had earned his stripes through hard work and dedication. As he approached the entrance, he noticed a woman in civilian clothes standing near the steps. She looked to be in her early 50s, with short gray hair and a calm demeanor. She wore a simple blue blazer and dark pants, nothing that would suggest military rank or importance. To Mike, she looked like just another civilian visitor, perhaps someone's family member or a contractor. The woman seemed to be studying a map of the base, looking slightly confused about where to go. Mike had always prided himself on being helpful to visitors, even though he sometimes enjoyed having a little fun with newcomers who didn't understand military protocol. "Excuse me, ma'am," Mike called out, his voice carrying a hint of playful authority. "This is a restricted military facility. Are you lost?" The woman looked up from her map with a gentle smile. "Actually, I'm looking for the command center. I have a meeting with Colonel Peterson at 900 hours. Mike couldn't help but chuckle at her use of military time. "Oh, you know military time, do you? That's cute. Most civilians just say 9 o'clock. He gestured toward the building behind him. "The command center is through those doors, down the hallway, and to your right, but you'll need proper clearance and an escort." The woman nodded politely. "Thank you for the information, Sergeant." Mike noticed she had correctly identified his rank from his uniform, which impressed him slightly. "No problem. But just so you know, around here we have a chain of command. I'm sure Colonel Peterson is a busy man, and civilians usually go through proper channels." He straightened his shoulders, enjoying his moment of authority. "What's your business with the colonel, if you don't mind me asking?" "Just a routine meeting about base operations," the woman replied calmly, not seeming bothered by his questioning. Mike felt emboldened by her non-confrontational response. "Well, since you seem to know a little about military protocol, maybe you can tell me something. What do you think about all these civilians who come on base and try to tell us military folks how to do our jobs? Sometimes I think they forget that we're the ones with the training and experience." The woman listened patiently, her expression remaining neutral. "I imagine that could be frustrating." "Exactly," Mike exclaimed, warming to his topic. "Just last month we had some hotshot consultant come in here, probably never spent a day in uniform, trying to reorganize our supply chain. Can you believe that? Some people just don't understand that rank means something in the military." As they continued talking, Mike noticed a black sedan pulling up to the building. 3 men in dress uniforms stepped out, their movements crisp and purposeful. They appeared to be high-ranking officers, but Mike was too focused on his conversation to pay much attention. "Speaking of rank," Mike continued, "I've worked hard to earn these stripes. Started as a private, worked my way up. It takes years of dedication, following orders, proving yourself. Not like the civilian world where you can just walk into a job and start giving orders." The woman nodded thoughtfully. "Rank does carry significant responsibility." "That's right," Mike said, pleased that she seemed to understand. "Like right now, as a sergeant, it's my responsibility to make sure visitors follow proper protocol. I can't just let anyone wander around the base, even if they claim to have meetings with colonels." One of the officers from the sedan approached them, and Mike noticed the man's uniform bore the insignia of a lieutenant colonel. The officer stopped a respectful distance away, clearly waiting. "Ma'am," the lieutenant colonel said, "your security detail is ready." Mike looked confused for a moment. Security detail for a civilian visitor. That seemed unusual, but he decided not to dwell on it. "Thank you, Colonel," the woman replied. "I was just having an interesting conversation with Sergeant Rodriguez here about military protocol and the importance of rank." The lieutenant colonel glanced at Mike with what seemed like barely concealed amusement. "I see. Will you need a few more minutes?" "Actually, I think we're finished," the woman said, turning back to Mike. "Thank you for the enlightening discussion about rank and authority, Sergeant. You've given me quite a lot to think about." Mike felt proud of himself for educating this civilian about military matters. "Anytime, ma'am. Always happy to help citizens understand how things work around here." As the woman began to walk toward the building with her escort, Mike called out, "Hey, you never told me your name." The woman paused and turned back with that same gentle smile. "I didn't think it was necessary for our discussion about rank." Something in her tone made Mike feel slightly uneasy, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. He watched as she entered the building, flanked by the three officers who maintained a respectful distance while clearly providing protection. It wasn't until later that morning, when Mike was filing paperwork in the administrative office, that he overheard two corporals talking about the important visitor who had arrived for meetings with the base commander. "I heard she's here for the annual readiness review," one of them said. "Yeah, apparently she's going to be evaluating our entire operation. Good thing Colonel Peterson has everything in order." Mike didn't think much of it until he saw the same woman walking past the office windows, now wearing a military uniform that made him do a double take. From his angle, he couldn't make out the rank insignia clearly, but the way other officers were treating her suggested she was someone very important. A nagging feeling began to grow in Mike's stomach as he remembered his earlier conversation. Had he just lectured someone important about military protocol? The way she had remained so calm and polite during his somewhat condescending speech suddenly seemed less like civilian deference and more like professional restraint. But Mike pushed the worry aside. After all, she had been dressed as a civilian when they met. How was he supposed to know she was military? And besides, he had been doing his job, ensuring base security and maintaining proper protocol. Any reasonable person would understand that. Still, as the day wore on, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that something about that morning's encounter wasn't quite right. The woman's calm responses, the way she had seemed almost amused by his lectures about rank and chain of command, the immediate appearance of high-ranking officers as her escort. It all seemed to suggest that there was more to the story than he had realized. But Sergeant Mike Rodriguez had no idea just how much more there was to learn. The afternoon brought an unusual buzz of activity to Fort Braxton. Mike noticed it first when he saw maintenance crews hurriedly cleaning areas that were already spotless. Then came the unusual sight of multiple colonel-ranked officers walking together, their conversations hushed and serious. Mike was restocking supplies in the equipment room when his friend Corporal James Martinez rushed in, his face flushed with excitement and worry. "Mike, you need to hear this," James whispered, looking around to make sure they were alone. "You know that woman you were talking to this morning? The one in civilian clothes?" "Yeah, what about her?" Mike asked, though the knot in his stomach tightened. "Dude, she's not just any visitor. I just heard Captain Williams talking to Lieutenant Foster. She's here for a surprise inspection of the entire base. And get this, she's not even from our branch." Mike frowned. "What do you mean, not from our branch?" "She's Navy, Mike. Navy brass doing a joint forces evaluation. Captain Williams looked like he was about to throw up when he was talking about her credentials." James moved closer, lowering his voice even further. "And from what I could overhear, she's not just any Navy officer." The equipment room suddenly felt very small. Mike set down the box he was holding, his hands beginning to shake slightly. "How high up are we talking?" "High enough that Colonel Peterson has been in emergency meetings all morning. High enough that they're flying in additional staff from headquarters. High enough that every officer on this base is walking around like they're about to face a firing squad." Mike felt the blood drain from his face. "But she was in civilian clothes. How was I supposed to know?" "That's what I thought too, until I heard more. Apparently, high-ranking officials sometimes travel in civilian clothes for security reasons, especially when they're doing surprise inspections. They don't want word getting out ahead of time." The two friends stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over them. Mike replayed the morning's conversation in his head, remembering every condescending word he had spoken about civilians telling military personnel how to do their jobs. "Maybe it's not as bad as we think," Mike said weakly. "I mean, I was just doing my job right, checking on visitors, maintaining security." James gave him a look that suggested he wasn't buying that rationalization. "Mike, you told me you spent 10 minutes explaining to her how rank works in the military. You lectured her about civilians not understanding chain of command." "She never said she was military." "Would you have in her position? Think about it, Mike. She's probably testing how lower-ranking personnel interact with unknowns, how they handle security, how they treat people, whether they make assumptions." Mike sank onto a nearby crate, his head in his hands. "This is bad, James. This is really bad." "It gets worse," James continued reluctantly. "I also heard that she specifically asked to review personnel files and interaction reports. Apparently, she's particularly interested in how base security handles unknown visitors. "Oh God," Mike groaned. "She's going to write a report about our conversation, about how I treated her. Look, maybe she appreciated your diligence in checking on visitors. Maybe she saw it as good security protocol." But even James didn't sound convinced by his own words. They both knew that Mike's interaction had crossed the line from security consciousness into something approaching arrogance. Later that afternoon, Mike was called to Captain Williams' office. His commanding officer looked pale and stressed, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept well. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I need to ask you about an interaction you had this morning with a visitor to the base." Mike's mouth went dry. "Yes, sir." "Can you describe the conversation you had with the woman in civilian clothes near the main building entrance?" Mike tried to keep his voice steady as he recounted the morning's events, though he found himself downplaying some of his more patronizing comments. Captain Williams listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a pad. "Sergeant, did the visitor identify herself to you in any way?" "No, sir. She just said she had a meeting with Colonel Peterson." "And you felt it appropriate to question her about her business on the base?" Mike hesitated. "Sir, I was concerned about security. She appeared to be lost and didn't have visible clearance." Captain Williams set down his pen and looked directly at Mike. "Sergeant, I'm going to be frank with you. The visitor you spoke with this morning is conducting a comprehensive evaluation of our base operations. Your interaction with her will likely be included in her report." "Sir, I was just trying to maintain security protocol." "I understand your intentions, Sergeant, but I need you to understand something. The way we treat all visitors, regardless of their apparent status, reflects on this entire base. Our guest this morning was observing not just our security procedures, but our professionalism, our respect for others, and our ability to maintain military courtesy under all circumstances." Mike felt his career flashing before his eyes. "Sir, if I had known." Captain Williams held up a hand. "The point, Sergeant, is that we should treat every interaction as if it matters, because it does. Whether someone is a visiting family member, a contractor, or," he paused meaningfully, "a high-ranking official in civilian clothes, they deserve our respect and professionalism." "Yes, sir, I understand." "I hope you do, Sergeant, because tomorrow morning you're going to have another opportunity to demonstrate that understanding." Mike's heart nearly stopped. "Sir, the visitor has requested to speak with several base personnel as part of her evaluation. You're on the list." Captain Williams leaned back in his chair. "I suggest you spend this evening thinking very carefully about military values like respect, humility, and the proper treatment of others, regardless of their apparent rank or status." As Mike left the captain's office, his legs felt weak. He had never been in trouble like this before. His record was spotless, his performance reviews excellent. Now, because of one conversation, his entire career might be in jeopardy. That evening, Mike called his father, a retired Army Master Sergeant who had served for 25 years. "Son, you messed up," his father said bluntly after hearing the story. "But here's what you're going to do. You're going to face whatever comes next with honesty and integrity. You're going to take responsibility for your actions without making excuses, and you're going to learn from this." "But Dad, what if she ruins my career?" "Mike, if your career gets ruined, it won't be because of her. It'll be because you let your ego get in the way of your professionalism. The military isn't about proving how much you know or how important you are. It's about service, respect, and doing your duty regardless of who's watching." As Mike lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't stop thinking about the woman's calm demeanor during their conversation. She had never once been rude or dismissive, even when he was being condescending. She had listened patiently, asked thoughtful questions, and thanked him for his time. Meanwhile, he had spent the entire conversation trying to prove his superiority and knowledge, never once considering that he might be wrong about who she was or what she represented. Tomorrow, he would find out just how wrong he had been. Mike barely slept that night. He arrived at the base 2 hours early, his uniform pressed to perfection, his shoes shined until they gleamed. If he was going to face judgment, he would do it looking like the professional soldier he aspired to be. At precisely 800 hours, he reported to the conference room as instructed. The room was larger than he expected, with a long mahogany table and chairs arranged formally. Several other personnel were already seated, including Lieutenant Foster, Corporal Martinez, and 2 MPs from the gate security. Mike took his assigned seat near the middle of the table, his hands folded carefully in front of him. The room was quiet except for the occasional shuffle of papers and nervous coughs. At exactly 8:10, the door opened. Colonel Peterson entered first, followed by Captain Williams and 2 other officers Mike didn't recognize. Finally, the woman from yesterday's encounter walked in, now wearing a Navy uniform. Mike's eyes immediately went to her rank insignia and his heart nearly stopped. 4 stars. 4 silver stars gleamed on her shoulder boards. Admiral, she was an admiral. Mike felt the room spin slightly as the full weight of his mistake hit him. He had spent 10 minutes lecturing a 4-star admiral about military rank and chain of command. He had questioned her business on the base, suggested she didn't understand military protocol, and implied that civilians couldn't comprehend the importance of earned authority. "Please remain seated," Admiral Sarah Chen said as she moved to the front of the room. Her voice was the same calm, measured tone Mike remembered from their conversation, but now it carried the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. "I'm Admiral Chen, and I'm here as part of a joint forces evaluation of base operations and personnel interactions. Over the next few minutes, I'll be speaking with each of you individually about your experiences and observations." Mike watched as she called the first person, Lieutenant Foster, to join her at the front of the room. Their conversation lasted about 5 minutes, conducted in low voices that the rest of the room couldn't hear. The lieutenant returned to his seat looking relieved, which gave Mike a small spark of hope. One by one, Admiral Chen spoke with each person in the room. Mike noticed that she seemed particularly interested in the MP's reports about gate security procedures and visitor processing. When it was Corporal Martinez's turn, Mike could see James gesturing as he described various protocols. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Admiral Chen called his name. "Sergeant Rodriguez." Mike stood on shaking legs and approached the front of the room. Up close, Admiral Chen looked exactly as she had the day before, calm, professional, and completely in control. The only difference was the uniform that now clearly displayed her rank and the numerous ribbons that spoke of a distinguished career spanning decades. "Please sit," she gestured to a chair across from her small table. Mike sat, his back straight, his eyes focused on a point just over her shoulder as he had been trained. "Sergeant, I want to discuss our conversation yesterday morning." "Yes, ma'am." "First, I want to commend you on your attention to security. You noticed an unfamiliar person near a restricted building and took the initiative to investigate. That shows good awareness and dedication to your duties." Mike blinked, surprised. "Thank you, ma'am. However, I also want to discuss some concerns about how that interaction proceeded." Admiral Chen's voice remained calm, but Mike could hear the subtle shift toward more serious territory. "Can you tell me what you were thinking during our conversation?" Mike took a deep breath. His father's words echoed in his mind about honesty and integrity. "Ma'am, I was thinking that you were a civilian visitor who might not understand military protocol. I wanted to be helpful, but I also wanted to. I guess I wanted to show that I understood how things worked here." "And how do you feel about that now?" "Ma'am, I realize that I made assumptions based on appearances. I treated you with less respect than I should have treated any visitor, regardless of who they were. I was more interested in demonstrating my knowledge than in actually being helpful." Admiral Chen nodded slowly. "That's a very honest assessment, Sergeant. What do you think the impact of that approach might be?" Mike considered carefully. "Ma'am, it could make visitors feel unwelcome or disrespected. It could reflect poorly on the base and on the military as a whole. And," he paused, knowing this next part was crucial, "it shows that I was more concerned with my own ego than with doing my job properly." "Those are important insights." Admiral Chen made a note on her paper. "Now, I want you to know that this conversation is part of a larger evaluation of how personnel at all levels interact with unknowns. You weren't singled out for punishment. You were selected because your interaction was, in many ways, typical of what we see across different bases." Mike felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. He wasn't unique in his mistake, but that didn't make it less of a mistake. "Sergeant, can you tell me what you think the most important military values are?" "Ma'am, I would say honor, courage, and commitment. Respect for others, regardless of rank, service before self. And do you think our conversation yesterday reflected those values? Mike felt his cheeks burn. No, ma'am, I was more focused on showing off my knowledge than on serving others or showing respect. Admiral Chen leaned forward slightly. Sergeant, I've been in the Navy for 32 years. I started as an ensign, just like you started as a private. I've made mistakes, including some that were embarrassing and humbling. The difference between a good sailor and a great one isn't whether they make mistakes, it's how they learn from them. Yes, ma'am. Yesterday, you spent considerable time explaining to me how rank works in the military, how it must be earned through years of dedication and hard work. You weren't wrong about any of that. Rank does matter, and it should be respected. But do you know what matters even more? Mike thought carefully. How we treat others, ma'am. Character, Admiral Chen said firmly. The rank on someone's uniform tells you their position in the hierarchy, but their character tells you who they really are. Yesterday, when you assumed I was just a civilian who couldn't understand military life, you revealed something about your character. Today, in how you're handling this conversation, you're revealing something else entirely. Mike felt tears threatening but fought them back. Ma'am, I want to be better than I was yesterday. That's exactly what I want to hear, Sergeant. Because here's what's going to happen. This interaction is going into my report, but not as a disciplinary issue. It's going as a case study in the importance of treating every person with respect and professionalism, regardless of their apparent status. Mike looked up surprised. You see, Sergeant, I deliberately dress in civilian clothes during these evaluations because I want to see how personnel treat people they perceive as having no authority over them. It's easy to be respectful to a 4-star admiral in uniform. The real test of character is how you treat someone when you think they can't affect your career. The weight of her words settled over Mike. Ma'am, I failed that test. Yesterday, yes, but today you're showing me that you understand why it matters. That's growth, Sergeant, and growth is what the military is all about. Admiral Chen closed her folder and looked directly at Mike. I'm recommending you for additional leadership training, not as punishment, but as investment. You have good instincts for security and a clear dedication to your duties. What you need now is to develop the wisdom to match your enthusiasm. Ma'am, I don't know how to thank you for this opportunity. Don't thank me, Sergeant. Earn it. Show me and your commanders that this conversation changed how you approach every interaction. Show me that you understand that respect isn't about rank, it's about recognizing the dignity in every person you meet. As Mike stood to leave, Admiral Chen added one final comment. Sergeant, I've evaluated hundreds of military personnel over the years. The ones who impress me most aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who own their mistakes and do better next time. Mike saluted sharply. Ma'am, I won't let you down. See that you don't, Sergeant. Your career is just beginning, and this moment can either be a stumbling block or a foundation stone. The choice is yours. As Mike left the conference room, his head was spinning with emotions, embarrassment, gratitude, determination, and a profound sense of having learned something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He had come face to face with the difference between having authority and earning respect, and he would never forget the lesson. In the weeks following Admiral Chen's visit, Mike found himself fundamentally changed. The encounter had shaken him to his core, but not in a way that made him bitter or defensive. Instead, it opened his eyes to aspects of leadership and character that he had never fully understood before. The first change was immediate and practical. Mike began treating every visitor to the base with the same level of respect and professionalism he would show to a commanding officer. When an elderly man in work clothes appeared at the gate looking for the maintenance supervisor, Mike didn't make assumptions about his importance. He learned that the man was a retired command sergeant major who now worked as a civilian contractor, and who had more military experience than everyone on the base combined. When a young woman in casual clothes asked for directions to the Family Services office, Mike didn't lecture her about base protocol. He walked her there personally and discovered she was a military spouse dealing with the stress of her husband's deployment. His respectful treatment of her during a difficult time meant more to her than he could have imagined. Captain Williams began to notice the change in Mike's approach. Rodriguez, I've had 3 different visitors comment on your professionalism this week. Whatever lesson you learned from Admiral Chen's visit, it's showing. But the real transformation went deeper than just visitor interactions. Mike started questioning his attitudes about authority, respect, and leadership. He enrolled in the leadership training program that Admiral Chen had recommended, but he also began studying on his own, reading books about military history and leadership philosophy. One evening, while reading about General Dwight Eisenhower's leadership during World War II, Mike came across a quote that hit him like a lightning bolt. The supreme quality for leadership is unquestionably integrity. Without it, no real success is possible, no matter whether it is on a section gang, a football field, in an army, or in an office. Mike realized that his interaction with Admiral Chen had revealed a lack of integrity in his character. He had been more concerned with appearing knowledgeable than with actually being helpful. He had treated someone differently based on assumptions about their status rather than treating them with consistent respect. The leadership training program proved to be both challenging and enlightening. The instructor, Master Sergeant Patricia Williams, had 20 years of experience and a reputation for being tough but fair. During the first session, she addressed the group of 12 junior NCOs. "Leadership isn't about having all the answers," she said. "It's about asking the right questions, treating people with respect, and being willing to admit when you're wrong. How many of you think you're already good leaders?" About half the hands went up, including Mike's. Master Sergeant Williams smiled knowingly. "Good, that means you have confidence. But confidence without humility is just arrogance, and arrogance is the enemy of good leadership. Over the next 8 weeks, we're going to break down some of your assumptions about what makes a good leader." The program covered everything from effective communication to ethical decision-making. But the session that affected Mike most deeply was on leading without authority. Master Sergeant Williams presented various scenarios where military personnel had to influence and lead people who weren't under their direct command: civilians, personnel from other services, or even higher-ranking officers in situations where expertise mattered more than rank. "True leadership isn't about making people follow you because they have to," she explained. "It's about making them want to follow you because they respect and trust you. And respect isn't automatic, it's earned through consistent character and competence." Mike found himself thinking about Admiral Chen throughout the program. She had demonstrated exactly this kind of leadership. Even when he didn't know her rank, he should have been able to recognize her leadership qualities: her calm confidence, her thoughtful questions, her patient listening. Instead, he had been so focused on his own perceived authority that he missed the signs of real leadership standing right in front of him. Halfway through the program, Mike had an opportunity to put his new understanding into practice. A new private, David Kim, was assigned to his unit. The young soldier was clearly intelligent and eager, but seemed overwhelmed by the complexity of military life. Some of the other NCOs were growing impatient with his questions and mistakes. Instead of joining in the criticism, Mike took David under his wing. He remembered how Admiral Chen had treated his mistake as a learning opportunity rather than a reason for punishment. Mike began mentoring David, explaining not just what to do, but why things were done certain ways. "Sergeant Rodriguez," David said one day after Mike had patiently explained the reasoning behind a particular protocol. "Thank you for taking the time to actually teach me instead of just yelling at me for not knowing." "We all start somewhere, Private Kim," Mike replied. "What matters is that you're willing to learn and improve." The comment reminded Mike of something Admiral Chen had said about growth being what the military was all about. He realized he was experiencing that growth firsthand, and it felt good to help someone else grow as well. 1 month after completing the leadership program, Mike received an unexpected visitor in his office. Captain Williams knocked on his door with a serious expression. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I have something for you." Captain Williams handed him an official-looking envelope. Mike opened it with trembling hands and found a letter of commendation signed by Admiral Chen herself. The letter praised his demonstrated growth in leadership character and commitment to treating all individuals with dignity and respect. It also mentioned that his approach to mentoring new personnel had been noted by multiple supervisors and cited as an example of effective junior leadership. But the part of the letter that meant the most to Mike was the final paragraph. "Sergeant Rodriguez has shown that true military bearing is not about asserting authority, but about accepting responsibility for one's actions, for one's growth, and for the development of others. His transformation following our initial interaction demonstrates the kind of character that the military needs in its future leaders." Mike read the letter 3 times before looking up at Captain Williams. "Sir, I don't feel like I deserve this." "That's exactly why you do deserve it, Sergeant. Someone who thought they deserved recognition for doing the right thing would be missing the point entirely." That evening, Mike called his father to share the news. "Son, I'm proud of you," the retired Master Sergeant said. "But I'm not proud because you got a commendation. I'm proud because you took a hard lesson and used it to become a better soldier and a better man." "Dad, I keep thinking about how badly I messed up that first conversation." "Mike, everyone messes up. The difference between successful people and unsuccessful people isn't whether they make mistakes. It's what they do after the mistake. You chose to learn and grow instead of making excuses or feeling sorry for yourself." As Mike hung up the phone, he reflected on how much had changed since that morning when he met Admiral Chen. He had thought he understood military leadership, but he had been focused on the external trappings, rank, authority, the ability to give orders. Now he understood that true leadership was about character, integrity, and the ability to bring out the best in others. He also understood something else that Admiral Chen had demonstrated so masterfully. The most powerful leaders often operated with such confidence and security that they didn't need to constantly assert their authority. They could afford to be patient, humble, and teachable because their leadership came from who they were, not from what rank they wore. Mike looked at the commendation letter one more time before carefully placing it in his desk drawer. It was a nice recognition, but the real reward was the knowledge that he was becoming the kind of leader he wanted to be, the kind who could learn from mistakes, treat others with respect regardless of their status, and help others grow into their potential. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to practice these lessons, but Mike felt ready for them in a way he never had before. 2 years later, Sergeant Mike Rodriguez had been promoted to Staff Sergeant and was serving as the non-commissioned officer in charge of base visitor services. The irony wasn't lost on him that he now officially held the responsibility he had unofficially assumed during his fateful encounter with Admiral Chen. The position had been created as part of a new military initiative focused on improving civilian-military relations and ensuring that all visitors to military installations received professional, respectful treatment. Mike's selection for the role was based partly on his leadership training, but primarily on his demonstrated ability to treat all visitors with appropriate dignity and respect. On a crisp autumn morning, Mike was reviewing the day's visitor log when his assistant, Corporal Lisa Thompson, knocked on his office door. "Staff Sergeant, we have a situation at the main gate. There's a woman asking to see you specifically. She says she's here for a follow-up evaluation." Mike felt his pulse quicken. Follow-up evaluation could mean many things, but given his history, he suspected he knew exactly who was asking for him. "Did she give her name?" "She said you would know who she was. She's in civilian clothes again, jeans and a sweater this time. The gate guards weren't sure how to handle it." Mike smiled, remembering his own confusion 2 years earlier. "Tell the guards to treat her with full military courtesy and escort her to conference room B. I'll be there in 5 minutes." As Mike walked toward the conference room, he reflected on how much had changed since their first meeting. He was no longer the same sergeant who had been more concerned with demonstrating his authority than with actually serving others. The leadership training, the mentoring experiences, and most importantly, the daily practice of treating every person with respect had fundamentally altered his approach to his duties. When he entered Conference Room B, Admiral Chen was standing near the window, looking out at the base grounds. She turned as he entered, and Mike was struck again by her calm presence and dignified bearing. "Admiral Chen," Mike said, standing at attention and saluting smartly. "At ease, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Please have a seat." Mike noticed that she had used his correct rank without hesitation, and he realized she had probably been tracking his career progression since their first encounter. "I imagine you're wondering why I'm here," Admiral Chen said, settling into the chair across from him. "Yes, ma'am, though I suspect it has to do with evaluating the progress of the Base Visitor Services program." "Partly yes, but also because I wanted to see for myself how someone handles a second chance." Admiral Chen opened a folder she had brought with her. "Your commanding officers speak very highly of your work in this position. Visitor satisfaction scores have improved dramatically since you took over, and there have been multiple commendations from civilian contractors and military families about the professionalism of their reception here. Thank you, ma'am. I've tried to apply the lessons I learned from our first meeting. Tell me about those lessons, Staff Sergeant. Mike considered his response carefully. Ma'am, I learned that respect isn't something you earn from others by demonstrating your authority. It's something you give to others by recognizing their dignity as human beings, regardless of their rank, status, or apparent importance. I learned that true leadership comes from character, not from position. Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. And how have you applied those lessons in your current role? Ma'am, every visitor who comes to this base receives the same level of professional treatment, whether they're a four-star general or a family member visiting for the first time. We've established protocols that assume positive intent and treat everyone as if they have important business here, because they do. Can you give me a specific example? Mike smiled, remembering several incidents. Last month, we had an elderly gentleman in overalls show up asking to see the base commander. My predecessor might have assumed he was confused or lost. Instead, we treated him with full courtesy, verified his identity properly, and discovered he was a Medal of Honor recipient who had served with the commander's father in Vietnam. The commander later said it was one of the most meaningful visits he'd had since taking command. That's exactly the kind of approach we're hoping to see service-wide, Admiral Chen said. But I'm curious about something else. How do you handle situations where visitors are difficult or demanding? Ma'am, I've found that most difficult behavior comes from people feeling disrespected or unheard. When someone arrives angry or frustrated, my team and I focus first on listening to their concerns and acknowledging their feelings. Usually, once people feel heard and respected, they become much more reasonable to work with. Admiral Chen made a note in her folder. Staff Sergeant, I want to share something with you. The encounter we had 2 years ago has become part of a case study we use in senior leadership training. Not as an example of failure, but as an example of how people can grow and change when they receive appropriate feedback and choose to act on it. Mike felt a mixture of embarrassment and pride. Ma'am, I hope it helps other people avoid making the same mistakes I did. Actually, that's exactly why I'm here today. We're expanding the leadership development program that you went through, and we need experienced NCOs to help facilitate the training. Your commanding officer has recommended you for the program, based on your transformation and your success in this position. Mike felt stunned. Ma'am, you're offering me a position in leadership development. I'm offering you the opportunity to help other military personnel learn the lessons you've learned. You would be working with junior NCOs and new officers, helping them understand the difference between authority and leadership, between rank and respect. Ma'am, I would be honored to accept that responsibility. Admiral Chen smiled. I was hoping you would say that, but before you accept, I want you to understand what this would involve. You would be traveling to different bases, working with personnel who might be exactly where you were 2 years ago, confident in their authority but not yet understanding true leadership. Some of them might react defensively to feedback. Some might not be ready to learn. Mike thought about Private Kim, who was now Specialist Kim and one of the most respected junior soldiers in his unit. He thought about the dozens of visitors whose experience at the base had been improved because his team treated them with dignity and respect. He thought about all the future military leaders who might benefit from learning these lessons early in their careers. Ma'am, if I can help even one person avoid the mistakes I made, or help them understand sooner what real leadership looks like, then this is exactly the kind of work I want to be doing. I was hoping you would see it that way. Admiral Chen closed her folder and stood up. There's one more thing, Staff Sergeant. Part of your role in this program would involve sharing your own story, talking about your mistakes, your learning process, and your growth. Are you comfortable with that level of vulnerability? Mike stood as well, his posture straight but relaxed. Ma'am, if sharing my failures can help others succeed, then I'm not just comfortable with it. I consider it my duty. As they walked toward the door, Admiral Chen paused. Staff Sergeant, 2 years ago, you spent a great deal of time explaining to me how rank works in the military. Today, you've shown me something much more important. You've shown me how character works in the military. The difference is remarkable. Ma'am, I had an excellent teacher. Admiral Chen chuckled softly. We taught each other, Staff Sergeant. You taught me that people can change, grow, and become better than they were. That's a lesson worth remembering in any leadership position. As Admiral Chen left the base that day, Mike returned to his office with a profound sense of gratitude. The encounter that had once seemed like the potential end of his career had become the beginning of something much better. He had learned that true strength came from admitting weakness, that real authority came from serving others, and that the best leaders were often those who had learned from their mistakes. He picked up the phone to call his father with the news about the new opportunity. "Dad, remember that admiral I told you about, the one who taught me about real leadership?" "Of course, son. What about her?" "She's giving me the chance to teach others what she taught me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mike, that's not just a career opportunity. That's a chance to pay forward one of the most important lessons you'll ever learn." "I know, Dad, and I can't wait to get started." As Mike hung up the phone, he looked out his office window at the main gate where his journey had begun 2 years earlier. Tomorrow, he would begin a new chapter in his military career, one focused on helping others discover the difference between having rank and earning respect, between holding authority and demonstrating leadership. The young sergeant who had once lectured a 4-star admiral about military protocol was gone, replaced by a staff sergeant who understood that the most important military bearing was the humility to keep learning and growing. And in that transformation lay a lesson that would serve him and all the people he would teach for the rest of their careers. Sometimes the most important encounters in life come disguised as ordinary moments. Mike Rodriguez had learned that lesson in the most humbling way possible, and he would spend the rest of his career helping others learn it in a more gentle but equally effective manner. The circle was complete, but the ripple effects of that autumn morning 2 years earlier would continue spreading for years to come, touching the lives of countless military personnel who would benefit from the hard-won wisdom of a sergeant who learned to see past rank to character, past authority to service, and past his own ego to the greater good of all those he was privileged to lead and serve.